The other film that we were interested in at the time was Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, the Russ Meyer film. So I mean, we were kind of pretty eclectic in our taste at the time.
There is an element in that film of a kind of elaborate, I mean, in one sense it has a cartoon element to it, but also, or comic strip perhaps more appropriately, element to it, but it also has an element of a home movie. And I think that, I think that some of the best films may be technically quite flawed, but they have something of the kind of edge and kind of humanity of a kind of, this is kind of a home movie for fairly extraordinary people. There may well have been other actors that auditioned initially for the role of Frank. I can't remember them. I just remember that Tim Curry walked in the door of the Royal Court Theatre saying, "Rip it up," and got the role. He ripped it up.
I made you, and I can break you just as easily.
Susan Sarandon and Barry Bostwick were obviously, in the film version, was the American casting. They, at that point in time, were both kind of emerging stars, but they certainly, at that point in time, would have been something that they were, that would be in very much the early part of their film careers. They just seemed somehow or other perfect for it. But again, they had that quality whereby they were able to play the roles, but they also understood that kind of, there's a kind of irony that's required, that's of a particular kind, to play the kind of material that Richard had written. And they had that, and I think that that all of those actors brought a great deal to the finished film.
Janet!
Dr. Scott!
Janet!
Where?
Rock!
One of the remarkable assets of it, given that once things grow, and Rocky certainly grew from a very small theatre production through umpteen stage versions all over the world into a film, was the way that we were able to maintain the kind of family, as it were, that had originally created it all the way through, and all of those people contributed enormously to it, but also the spirit of that being kept alive was something that has also translated in the film, and so that the contributions of Richard Hartley working with Richard O'Brien on the music, of Brian Thompson and Sue Blaine on the design side, which in the film was then augmented by the cinematographer Peter Sajitsky and Graham Clifford, the editor in particular. All of this played a major role in the film, because in the case of people like Brian, Sue, Richard Hartley and so forth, they had actually travelled the entire journey from a small production in the theatre upstairs at the Royal Court in London all the way to a fairly major motion picture. One of the qualities about Rocky Horror in all its forms was that there was a kind of, it was in essence a first work. It was Richard's first musical, and it was full of his enthusiasms in the way that first works always are. As it happened, those enthusiasms were then shared by a lot of other people. But I also think that everybody else involved with it, brought some of those enthusiasms, and there are kind of echoes of those in the film. I can think of a number of them, and they're very, very disparate ones. In the case of the Transylvanians, there's kind of there's almost a lineage there back to the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz, with the sped-up voices singing, we're out of the woods, etc., etc., to Let's Do the Time Warp Again, which we also deliberately recorded and sped up the voices on. There were many more echoes and influences through the film. They included one of my favourite filmmakers, F.W. Murnau, who made the original Nosferatu. When we were doing the original stage productions, the film element was already there, because I remember suggesting to Richard at one stage that the trio needed a dance, and the point of reference I gave to him was curiously in a film that's miles away from Rocky Horror, which is Bonaparte of Jean-Luc Godard, where the three gangsters dance the Madison in the cafe. It's also interestingly the dance that inspired the dance in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction between Irma Thurman and John Travolta. So that's the kind of level of, when I talk about the fact that the film is invested with, on one hand, a very popular kind of comic strip surface. Underneath that, it's also invested with a very sophisticated set of sensibilities, which was not certainly only mine, but that of many of people involved in it, including some of the cast.
The fact that it's lasted, I think, is partly due to the enormous quality of the design. I mean, I think both the costume designer and the film designer were incredibly talented and created a look that could last this long.
Our whole idea of the film was to make it very theatrical, and the film was in fact going to open with, like you were going to see red velvet curtains, right? And they were going to open on a black and white screen, and the film was going to have no colour up until that first zoom up onto Frankenfurter's face, and the only colour was going to be his red lips. And so, in fact, if you watch the film, what's happened, the only colour that's come into it has actually been added by lighting, because the ballroom was conceived as a black and white set. And that was one of the things. It was a bit like The Wizard of Oz. The idea was that once they met Frankenfurter, then the colour would come in. But the studio felt that the techniques weren't there for it to be done effectively.
We made it a movie about 2 years after its original opening, and the movie was made for about $1.25 million, and it bombed when it came out. It did no business.
The early previews were not successful at all. I mean, that's being kind to it. We had a lot of walkouts and a lot of people that were offended, mostly because it's obvious now you couldn't spring it on the general public, and especially it depended on what films you previewed with, because the film that was showing there creates the audience that's going to preview a film. And there was nothing anywhere near Rocky Horror that was at that time playing theaters, so we would be playing with things that were just the total opposite, and everything was the opposite of Rocky Horror at that time. But we did find that amongst the audience were, in small numbers, but very appreciative and almost, well, they would thank us at the end. You know, they'd search us out and say, "Thanks for making that kind of film. You've made a film that is for us, or that we really wanted to see." And also satisfying was that people that had seen the play around the Los Angeles area would say we had done right by the play. We hadn't misused the play. And so we were satisfied creatively that we had done what we set out to do as filmmakers. The next step was exhibition.
About a year later, it started to play the late night circuit.
I don't think there were cult films then, were there? I mean, I suppose Todd Browning's Freaks or something. No, I mean, no. I mean, I hoped it was going to be a hit, and then it came out and it very definitely wasn't. So, you know, I went back to England.
It opened in London. It was a complete flop. It wasn't until I saw the film in 1977 in New York at the Waverley with the full-on crowd participation, and that was the time when I realised that somehow we'd struck something. They said, "Well, gee, we thought it was pretty boring, and we thought if we yelled back, you know," and they were trying to have fun with the film. And I think, as that was the very spirit in which we'd done the film anyway, it seemed like it sort of caught on.
The success of Rocky Horror came out of the failure of Rocky Horror. I think if Rocky Horror had come out and been moderately successful, it might be gone today. The fact that it failed and we had to look for an alternative way of exhibiting it was added to what became the phenomenon.
No, we never could imagine it. I mean, even when we were rehearsing the little play, we never realised that was going to be such an enormous success. It was the little theatre held 60 people. And we all thought it was a great show, but we had no idea that would be such a smash, and this is just another thing entirely. Particularly because it was a delay. Years passed, 5 years, I think, before the film really took off.
Who could have imagined that? I couldn't. But all I know is, when I first went to see the film in London with little Nell, I was a total fan of the film. The audience at the time weren't. They all said, "Oh, the show was so much better." But she and I sat together and we yelled and screamed like everyone else does all the time.
appeal to people's sexuality. I think the theme line, "Don't dream it, be it." Hit a nerve at a time when people were much more conservative and it just was like, just let rip. And people did. And that whole sort of transsexual, you know, AC/DC thing that most people have in them was allowed to be expressed.
Camp, kitsch and schmaltz. Was it the work parodies many kind of forms of entertainment and of that time?
I have no idea. Maybe you shouldn't try to figure it out, you know. Maybe it's just like love. You shouldn't try to dissect it, just enjoy it.
Speaks to the young people of today about the loss of innocence. It's a rite of initiation. The music is wonderful. The characters are so identifiable. I mean, you can really find something in that movie to identify with. And it's offbeat. It's fresh for midnight. It's perfect for midnight. And then once the audience participation began, there are people who are attracted to that. So there's a whole many different plateaus of attraction. Some people attracted for Tim Curry's performance, other people for the total movie, to Richard O'Brien, to Susan, whatever. Right place, right time. I've heard many different answers, and I believe it's a combination of all those things.
Every Saturday, there's a guaranteed party, whether you have a date or not.
Whatever happened to Saturday night? Yes, here he is. Yes, it is. It's Tim Curry.
It's so comforting to know there are so many people in this world sicker than I am. I think I'm the only person here tonight who doesn't look like me.
It's still playing here in Sydney on a Friday night, and I go along, you know, occasionally, every, you know, couple of years or something. And I do find it extraordinary to see new generations of people still enjoying the film. I mean, I think the best thing about the film is that it hasn't dated. I mean, it seems as fresh as it was all those years ago. It doesn't have any, there's nothing, and I think that's because it never was a kind of a film to do with fashion. There was never, you know, people aren't wearing flares or any of that kind of thing. So, I mean, it's quite a, it was obviously quite smart in the way we did it, but we didn't quite know we were doing it, I think.
The film still runs once a week on, I think it's Friday night, and there's a smaller version, but nothing compared to America. They don't, you know, get into the frocks quite so much. Americans seem to be more manic in that way, more obsessive, and the way that they identify so much with the characters and want to imitate them. The English are far more repressed and cool. They don't like to get around in fishnets quite so much. But the Americans just love that. They're more flamboyant in many ways.
A lot of these kids who perform in these shows and who get off on all of this sort of stuff will keep it alive for longer, and they'll pass it down to their younger brothers and sisters too as they go off to college or, you know, into the business world.
It has been passed on from generation to generation, from brothers and sisters and parents to their children, and somewhat a rite of passage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably the first time that the audience has been as much, if not a greater part of the creative process than the people that made it.
What was the matter? Damn it. I knew I should have gotten that spare tire fixed.
Now, what I want to know is how many people out here actually play Brad Majors? Yeah, right. 2%, right? 2%. What, is he boring? What? Huh? Okay, wait a minute. All the people who play Brad Majors, I want them all to say, along with me, damn it, Janet. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Damn it, Janet. I've got nothing to say, and that's damn it. I love you.
I think the opportunity to dress up and make believe. I think we all need to make believe. I'm lucky that that's my job, and I get paid to do it. But I know there's amateur dramatics, beauty pageants, Miss Junior America. All this cheerleading. It's all a need to an exhibitionist kind of need. There's nothing wrong with it.
They're closet actors, I don't know.
I really love that rock and
In terms of not doing anything for my career, I don't think I've ever gotten another film based on it, but I think that it's, I'm real pleased to have that extra audience.
It was the most joyous thing to do, and I think it's given immense pleasure to lots of people. It's given me a lot of pleasure.
It took me to LA and New York and into my first film, which Rocky Horror was my first film.
I thought it was a big adventure.
And when I was shooting it, it was great. And when I saw it in Philadelphia for the first time, I thought it was terrible. And then I saw it again with an audience full of people, because in Philadelphia there was no one there. Saw it with an audience full of people, and I said, this is great.
Brian's kind of fumbled with the white plastic bell. I taste the baby pink lipstick and that's her nail. She was really nice and that she did. Get back and run, put some hair on, buddy. How to sing his very last song. When you're under and you're there, you try to sing along. Feel pretty good.
Actually, I had a vision when I was underwater. The scene when we were all underwater and and we were all kissing and hugging and everything. I had this vision that perhaps in about 3 or 4 years I saw thousands of kids dressed up in fishnet stockings, kissing each other's thighs in neighborhood swimming pools. And my God, it's come true, hasn't it? I think about the time Susan Sarandon stepped on my toe in 4.5-inch spike heels, and it's on film. You see it in the movie. It's right at the end when we're on stage. And what else do I remember? I remember trying to dance in 5-inch heels myself, wet, coming out of the pool, dressed in a Merry Widow. These are moments that I'll never be able to recapture. Who's going to ask me from now on in my career to dress up in that kind of costume? I'll never forget the time that they covered my entire body with plaster to make a plaster casting of my whole body, to make that statue that happens on the end. I'll never forget how bloody cold it was when we would get out of the pool all the time. We were always wet, because we were running around in underwear all the time.
Nothing has stopped it. I mean, 3 administrations at Fox couldn't kill it. And Ronald Reagan couldn't kill it, so I don't see what could stop it.
I think I'll be doing the time warp when I'm 90.
I'm happy with it as it is, as a kind of home movie about some pretty extraordinary people that lived at a particular moment in time and that somehow or other ended up entertaining the whole world.
Science fiction. Double feature. Frank has lost his creatures.